Like many developing countries, as wealth increases, we move from a world of acute diseases to chronic diseases. And the most important chronic disease in terms of prevalence and impact is actually obesity.
Mounjaro is, I think for a middle class, it's quite expensive. It's like 14K a month.
India is not unique, but is in a smaller group of countries that has not a broad-based effective insurance scheme. And so those costs are borne by people.
You know, the kind of transformation that we are seeing, it's so dramatic. Reminds me of what Gilead did with hepatitis C.
I think at an important moment to have a solution, unlike other developed countries, which didn't have a Mounjaro when they went through this process, India does. So seizing that opportunity to use biotechnology to help a modern India be healthy and wealthy.
You just heard David Ricks, the global CEO of pharma giant Eli Lilly and its India president Winselow Thacker, talking to my colleagues Vikas Dandekar and Teena Thacker. Now, Ricks was in India to launch Eli Lilly's weight loss drug Mounjaro. Weight loss drugs, a segment that has taken the world by storm and literally catapulted Eli Lilly to being the largest pharma company globally with a market cap of over $800 billion. In the conversation, Ricks spoke about 10 obesity drugs in the pipeline, including an oral drug that may also be suitable for the Indian market. He spoke about potential partnerships with Indian companies. He also spoke about several other strands of pharma research, innovation, and drug development, including in genetics, cancer, and neurosciences. And of course, he spoke about phenomenal breakthroughs in AI. All of this to create a pathway for new treatment modalities for the world. Listen on, it's Thursday, the 27th of March, and this is a very special corner of his conversation only on the Morning Brief.
Thank you so much, Dave, for the time. And it's your second visit in 2 years. Last year, we spoke about Mounjaro launch expected this year. It's happened now. Your initial thoughts?
Yeah, great to be back with you. Great to be back in India. It's such an exciting place for us to do business. But an important one and a milestone is launching Mounjaro or Tirzepatide here in India. So in India, like many developing countries, as wealth increases, we move from a world of acute diseases to chronic diseases. And the most important chronic disease in terms of prevalence and impact is actually obesity. So as countries and households increase their economic prosperity, often we find obesity, and then following that, rises in diabetes, cardiovascular disease, stroke, even cancers and other things. We can introduce a solution like Mounjaro, which really doesn't cure obesity, but it goes a long way to address its problems. And we've proven that in many studies and are proud to launch that this week here in India.
But last time you spoke about price, and India is a price-sensitive country. And the launch of Mounjaro is, I think for a middle class, it's quite expensive. It's like 14K a month. So do you think that will be a barrier for, expanding the reach to people of your drug?
I'll comment generally about how we do pricing, and maybe Winselow can speak about the Indian strategy. I mean, overall, we price to value. Our goal is to create medicines that produce excess value. India is not unique, but is in a smaller group of countries that has not a broad-based effective insurance scheme. And so those costs are borne by people. We think about that, though, as a second factor, careful factor in our pricing strategy. We think we've selected pricing that both produces extra value for society, rewards the innovator, so we will keep making new medicines.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add on to that. In India, there are 100 million patients with obesity. And so the launch of Mounjaro is an opportunity for us to, one, bring a product that we think will have a significant impact for them for both type 2 diabetes and obesity. And also, we think we priced it at a level where patients can afford the product. We also know that there are significant willingness to pay for obesity treatment in general. And so we're hopeful that given the ability to access Mounjaro, that it's going to make a significant impact for those patients, both with type 2 diabetes and with obesity.
Right. In terms of your expectations from the Indian market, you have a slew of launches coming in other emerging markets as well. How do you want to position that?
For Mounjaro.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, first I'll point out Mounjaro is one of many obesity products coming from Lilly. In the next few months, we expect data, for instance, on our oral GLP-1, particularly in emerging markets, could be quite an important tool because it doesn't require refrigeration. We are launching now in countries like in Latin America. I just traveled here from China, where we just introduced it a few months ago. People think about obesity as a developed market condition, but it's actually growing rapidly in these large markets like India. We have been gated a bit in this rollout by supply expansion plans. Most recently announcing a $50 billion capital program, the largest capital program in the history of the United States in our industry, to build the capacity to supply not just Mounjaro, but the follow-on products as well at global scale.
Yes, correct. On orforglipron, what would be the launch possibilities in India?
Yeah, well, we haven't gotten there quite yet. We do expect our obesity data, should the product perform as expected. We'll get the first data set in April. That's a diabetes study, but the 2 obesity studies will read out in the 3rd quarter. So then usually within 90 days or so, we'll submit. And I don't have the details of our submission plans in India, but of course we'll need to submit and be approved. That could include by second half of 26 launches in US and Europe, and maybe India to follow that. So not too far away.
Now, for the slew of launches that you mentioned, there's again a triple agonist.
Yes,
yes, and your competitor is trying hard. Yesterday, there was a deal which came up with a Chinese company for a $2 billion deal. Now, there is also a lot of focus on muscle preserving, because with weight loss comes muscle loss issues also. How soon do you think you will be able to progress on that? Because that again was a very big deal for you, the bimagrumab.
Bimagrumab, yeah. So, good. You have all the background. So what you're pointing out is something important, which is that, well, there's a lot of focus on Mounjaro today as a leading solution, a really best-in-class solution for obesity. In the coming years, there'll be many other solutions. By the way, obesity is maybe 40% of adult disease. So this is a much healthier future we can envision. And Lilly has 10 pipeline projects pursuing obesity. So you mentioned a few of them. Orforglipron is the next data set. The next one beyond that, we'll have the first phase 3 readout for retatrutide, phase 3 in the fall. And we'll begin to get those data through 26 and could imagine submitting in 27 with retatrutide. That's important vis-a-vis the Novo announcement or anyone else's, just pointing out we're maybe 4 or 5 years ahead of competitors on the triple-acting solution. And then we'll have other solutions in between, including the question about what about muscle loss. Now, it's important to frame this. No matter how we lose weight, if we do it with diet and exercise, which is preferred, or with bariatric surgery, or with any of the weight loss medications, you will lose muscle mass as you lose body mass. But the clinical measure of success isn't did you lose muscle or not. The clinical measure is did your proportion of fat to total body mass change in a positive way. And in Mounjaro, it's very clear that it does. But for some patients, people do worry, particularly elderly patients who have less ability to exercise to begin with, but are also obese. So bimagrumab is targeted at that kind of population.
Do you plan to join hands with any company in India for Mounjaro? Otherwise, those companies which have better reach and are in India?
We're open to partnerships of all kinds. I think Lilly's presence in India, which really began earlier in my career when we had a partnership with Ranbaxy a long time ago to enter the market in the 90s. And then more recently with companies like Lupin and others, Cipla, embraces partnership. This obesity market is a little bit different. So I'll caveat this as well by saying, of course, with talking to doctors and hospitals is very important, and reaching the whole of the market could be an interesting type of partnership. And here's another area for partnership with some of the hyperscaled Indian tech companies. What do? They disseminate information and in some cases have built systems where people can seek treatment and even fulfill prescriptions. So we're open to those partnerships as well. And it seems like in a modern tech-enabled India, that's going to be a very important piece here. And then thirdly, partnerships with government. Because as I mentioned, public health will be driven in large part by chronic disease going forward in India, whereas in the past we were focused on acute viruses, bacteria, moving to chronic disease. And here's another place where we're open for partnership to help local governments, state governments, and the federal government enable a healthy India for the future. So yeah, partnerships will be key to our success here.
Right. In fact, our Prime Minister also spoke about obesity. And
yes, I was reading about that in my
preparation. It was quite a coincidence. Tell me, the kind of transformation that we are seeing, it's so dramatic. Reminds me of what Gilead did with hepatitis C. Yeah, it kind of wiped out.
Eradicated it, yeah. I think we see that kind of future.
Do you see that?
Yeah, and I think for India, this is particularly important. One, because it's a rising nation. We can look at every other country that went through this cycle and pretty accurately predict that non-communicable diseases, and particularly cardiovascular diabetes, obesity, will become the most important health factor. Secondly, is probably for some cultural reasons, probably for some genetic reasons, India is particularly susceptible to obesity.
Right.
And then, of course, dietary and lifestyle considerations play an important role. And urbanization isn't usually good news for obesity management, but it's happening rapidly in India. So we're arriving, I think, at an important moment to have a solution, unlike other developed countries, which didn't have a Mounjaro when they went through this process. India does. So seizing that opportunity to use biotechnology to help a modern India be healthy and wealthy is a good opportunity.
Right. Absolutely. So coming to the larger political issues, tariff is something that is everyone's on the watch list of that now. April 2, we'll know exactly what's the next step of US tariffs. Everyone is getting impacted, with that situation. And there are lots of calculations being made on what kind of fundamental change will that require. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know any more than you or your readers and listeners. I mean, we're all waiting to hear. Clearly, the president has a mandate to try to rebalance the situation. I think that's their goal. Does that mean that needs to be done through confrontation and escalation? I don't think so. I don't think that's the preferred route. As a multinational company, we certainly advocate for free trade and reducing trade barriers, both tariffs and non-tariff trade barriers. So we hope that this process can lead to that. And I personally think that's the mandate that the American people gave the president, is to make for fair trade, not restricted trade. And so we shouldn't misinterpret that.
Right. But internally also there have been a lot of changes that he's doing in terms of cutting down on FDA's, force, the talent. NIH funding also is being cut.
Yeah,
that definitely goes against innovation and research.
I don't know if it definitely goes against innovation and research, to be honest. I think the NIH funds more basic research as a government than every other government combined in the world. So that's important to remember. And like any process, I think it can be improved. FDA, I think it's important to remember that most of the staff supporting the drug side of FDA, because it's food, drug, and cosmetics, is funded by user fees of the industry.
Yes.
The generic industry and the innovative industry like Lilly. So there's not much savings to be had through resource cuts. And actually, there haven't been too many resource cuts so far. I expect more stability, but a big discussion when those user fee laws are renegotiated. Now, that's in 2027. So I think we'll get there in a few years' time. But I would expect minimal disruption. Industry's point, and I think here we stand united with the large generic players in India, is let's have better performance from the FDA.
Exactly.
Let's have more consistent scientific evaluation and more on-time approvals. So that's our emphasis with the administration so far.
We also hear that India's drug regulator has given approval to Wegovy, and we'll also see a lot of generics, coming out. So how do you see that, the competition that you're going to have in maybe next few months?
Yeah, well, we embrace competition. I think as to the other innovative company and semaglutide for weight loss, we're used to competing with them. What we see in markets where we compete directly with unlimited supply, like the US, is patients and doctors are choosing Mounjaro at a much higher rate.
Yes.
Right now, I think I just saw the last week in the US, we have more than 70% of all new starts are going to Mounjaro when there's an equal playing field. So I think we feel very confident about our profile. I think we're the only medicine approved with an indication in other markets, not in India yet, for obstructive sleep apnea. So that's what we do that's what you'll see from Mounjaro, innovation on clinical application, and then also the oral project. So we feel very good about our competitive position. Now, generics will enter here, one of the earliest major markets to have generics. That can lead to a discussion about intellectual property in India, but I think we're comfortable as long as we have a differentiated product competing with generics. And generics play a key role in the ecosystem of pharma by freeing up dollars for innovation and yet serving more people. So I think if the result of that is people who could not afford the leading solution like Mounjaro can have access, great. That means more people can manage their obesity, which is our mission, is to improve public health. So there's a place for both. Those industries live side by side fairly, and I think we feel good about our competitive footing.
Right. Early to go there, but in case there is a slew of semaglutide launches,
Probably.
yeah. Will you consider price drops?
Well, commercial strategies evolve. That's natural. I think for Mounjaro, the goal is really to first position it as the superior therapy. And then we could talk, as I mentioned earlier, pricing is a function of value. But we'll look at our commercial strategies when that's a reality.
Right. One more thing that actually stands out for India is Mounjaro is the only product which has been launched, not Zepbound. So how do you want to differentiate?
Well, Zepbound is actually the exception, not the rule. So in a few markets, we've launched 2 brands. Why do this? It's really a function of the local reimbursement and regulatory processes. So some regulators in a few markets have requested a second brand to avoid confusion about the diabetes versus obesity. And in the US, we did it mostly for payer reasons, is that it's accepted by insurance companies to reimburse Mounjaro for diabetes and actually other health conditions, but not yet accepted as obesity as a reimbursed condition. So by separating them, we allow the insurance companies to differentiate the 2 products. It's the same medicine,
Yes.
with the same doses.
Right. So you just come from China, and Biosecure Act, they seem to have averted for now all the problems that we were actually talking about, and the consequent gains for Indian CDMOs. Or how do you see the approach going forward now? And do you think that will come back again?
I don't know. It's very different. I think you could lose a lot of money betting on what Congress will do. But what I'll say is I think the energy behind diversifying and localizing supply chains has not decreased in the last year. I think it's increased.
Okay.
So I think there's a tremendous opportunity for the Indian economy to do 2 things. One, embrace end-to-end supply chain for global export. And here, of course, there's quite a bit already and a strong legacy and history, but reasserting itself as a global leader, great for the world. I think that would be a good decision. And we'd be interested in partnering with Indian companies on supply chain in this regard, not just for India, but beyond. The second thing is embracing innovation. So I think there's a long kind of history tied to the history of the generic industry here, but this has happened in other markets too, of thinking we have to pick between a market that embraces low-cost generics or a market that embraces innovation. But actually, and there's many markets where have gone through this process, the policies are different. They're actually side-by-side industries, not competitors.
Right.
And of course, we always argue about intellectual property, but I think there's a way for India to do both. And if you look at the role of this country, the incredible natural resource of the human minds that are in India, and the opportunity to become an innovation powerhouse for biopharma is huge. And I think that will not happen, though, without changing the policy context of India.
Yes.
And I think that's what everyone's watching and will be my advocacy while I'm here this week and others, I'm sure, is to think about this as two separate markets. Don't cut off your participation in innovation.
Right.
Embrace that. At the same time, you can strengthen the generic industry. That would be good.
So on Inflation Reduction Act, where do you stand now? Because the administration has changed. The previous regime was more aggressive. How do you see that moving now? You were not particularly happy with the Medicare Part D.
Yeah. Well, the Inflation Reduction Act, the two things that were, one was pretty useful. One was pretty damaging. What was useful was improving the insurance benefit for seniors in the U.S., and we supported that. So lowering their out-of-pocket, making that insurance scheme, which hadn't been changed in 20 years, work better for seniors. But the other part was government price setting. The real problem was on chemical medicines, pills, intervening way too early. And this immediately reduced the investment in biopharma behind oral products in the United States, where now the data we have is it's almost half of 3 years ago.
Right.
Well, this is stupid. And we need small molecule chemistry. Although we think of these as older medications, and they are, but we're also using chemistry for many new medications like orforglipron. And shortening the product life cycle of free pricing will just reduce research. And we'll have fewer of these medications. And the U.S. plays a key role in the world because most business cases for a new R&D project are built on the U.S. market. So if I'm a small company developing a chemical solution for a brain disease or a cancer where you only can use chemistry, I'm disappointed in the IRA. Now, we'll see. We've proposed, and there's been a bill put on the House floor, bipartisan, to change that 9-year intervention by the government to something longer.
Right.
And we would embrace that. And there's a way to make sure the government has the assurance that they don't pay high prices forever, at the same time reward innovation. So that's what we advocate for.
Right. Lilly is mostly directly associated with weight loss now, the way people perceive it. Obviously, the world is much beyond that for Lilly as well. But, in terms of the science that you see, we're seeing cell and gene therapies emerging, tri-specifics becoming very big, all kinds of radiopharmaceuticals, oligos coming up in a big way.
Yes.
How do you want to categorize those?
Well, we're participating in all those things. I think a key message for your readers we really are in an amazing age of biopharmaceutical innovation because of two things that are already in the run rate and one thing that isn't. Those two things are new modalities you're mentioning here. So new ways to attack disease. And with each new method, we open up more targets. So we can go after cancer, and like you mentioned, radioligands. We used to give radiation generally, locally, but generally. Yeah. And of course, that causes damage to healthy tissue. Now we can envision a world where we attach the radiation to something that only goes to the tumor.
Exactly.
And very benign side effects. This can allow us to treat cancer more aggressively, earlier, and more safely. And I think that could be a breakthrough. It's another example where we can bring the chemotherapy directly to the tumor, same everything. Oligos is another whole pathway where we're silencing RNA or protein production at the basic level in a super targeted way. So for instance, Lilly is pursuing now a really important target for Indians, which is the lowering of LPA cholesterol particles. So despite the success of statins and other commonly used cholesterol-lowering medications, there's one particular particle that is toxic, but is not addressed by those, and it's called LPA. It's more prevalent in South Asians than other populations, actually. And so Lilly has a solution in phase 3, lepodisiran, which is potential for once-a-year administration to reduce by 90% this cholesterol type. So we're in cell, gene, all the other therapy types are exploding, and probably there'll be more when I come next year. I think you're reminding us here that, we participate in lots of other disease states, cancer, immunology, brain disease, which the more modalities we have, the more new types of drugs we can make. Probably no company will have as many opportunities to invest in exciting breakthroughs as Lilly, mostly because of the success of the company right now. This year, we're projecting to spend $14 billion in research and development. And because we have so much capacity, I think we can take risk and or invest for the long term in really unique ways to solve human health problems. which is what our company is all about.
So the one that you just mentioned about the
Lepidisiran?
yeah.
Yeah.
Is this also something similar to the PCSK9?
It is, yeah. So that there's a PCSK9, I think Novartis makes it, that is a very infrequent dosed medicine for cholesterol. But here the idea is that PCSK9 does not address LPA, this target. So this is targeted at just LPA. Very benign, few side effects, very infrequent administration, and suppressing this cardiovascular risk factor for a long time. This could be a very important product for this country.
And you'll do Indian trials also.
Yeah, we have Indians in the global program.
Okay. And has it started?
Yeah, we're in the middle of phase 3 now.
It's just been a week or not even a week. Is it too early to ask about the response? Any response that you have got from the Indian market so far?
We've had a strong response as far as awareness, and even from opinion leaders and physicians about us introducing the product. So we are now in the midst of supplying distributors. And so we will see in the next couple of weeks the actual prescriptions that come through, but the reception has been very good. We're hopeful that in the next few weeks, patients will start to actually benefit from the product.
And what about the, regulatory atmosphere in India? If you compare it with other developing countries, do you think that we are at par or we are better, or can we do better? Or what do you think?
One of the keys to that, and there's 3 key policy kind of legs to the stool to create a context for massive investment in innovation and growth of an innovative sector. One of them is regulatory, global regulatory rules that are common. When we have global regulatory rules that are common, we can just focus on the science and don't have to do repetitive things that are inefficient. So we need to see some change there for India. There's something called the International Congress of Harmonization, which is an effort between major regulatory players to have common rules about common things. And adopting those guidelines more rapidly would be extremely helpful. There has been a recent positive change of an opportunity to submit global data versus recreate data in India for your phase 3 programs. That's welcome, but we think should become the standard, not an exception. Of course, the second is IP and joining and fully supporting a full reward period for intellectual property. We'd like to see that. And the third, which will come with economic development, is development of public and private insurance schemes so people can prepay in a way, either through their taxes or insurance premiums for illness. And this is good for, of course, our industry development, but it's also good for a consumer-driven society, because when people have to worry about surprising expenses, they oversave, right? And the economic growth is abated.
So we see a lot of people talking about de novo really not happening because it's all based on optimization. Then there was the last story that I read in New York Times, spoke about a rare genetic disorder where a doctor actually found some combination and it actually saved the patient from something very rare called poems.
Yeah.
And that was, and it was exactly. So it was some water accumulation in the abdomen.
Yes.
And now it's so healthy. Yeah. It's like amazing.
Yeah.
So Lilly's role in that.
Yeah, we're a very tech-forward, AI-driven company, and I think the application of these models have their full impact and power. We have to appreciate that it's a very complicated chain of events that leads to a new medicine, maybe hundreds of steps, that we probably need to make progress one by one through those steps, not some overarching algorithm that will just create de novo drugs that miraculously work. Rather, break it down, the problem, into small parts. We're in the process of doing that right now ourselves. We partner with every major tech player, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, others, and even small tech bios that are forming to solve these problems piece by piece. And we also need to recognize that biology, maybe we understand 10 or 15% of human biology, unlike language, which we understand 100% of human language because it's on the internet, and machines, once we understand all of that, they can learn it.
Right.
But we mostly don't understand biology still. The 15% we know requires data sets that are mostly fragmented. So that's another problem in training data. Actually, here, big companies have a big advantage because our data sets aren't fragmented. We can train models on what we know, but in the public domain, they're very fragmented. So that's a difficult thing to do.
So from $45 billion that you had last year, where do you think you can predict a 5-year future, maybe?
5 years we don't do. We do 1 year at a time. So 59.5 is the target for this year.
Okay.
Yeah. That's the mid-range of our guidance.
Okay.
That makes us, I mean, last year we were easily the fastest growing scaled pharma player.
Yeah.
This is why our market cap is higher. We grew 32%
Yeah.
on a large base, on a $34 billion base.
Right.
So $45 billion last year, projecting another low 30s growth rate so growth on growth. So the absolute growth up $15 billion year over year. And at some point that will slow. It's heavily driven by Mounjaro and our weight loss medications, but creating that kind of exponential growth is very difficult over time. We have these ambitions. We have to do the work day to day though to achieve them. You know, it's you have to imagine both things at the same time, a bright future, but the daily activity is to drive it.
Right. Absolutely unbelievable times. We've never seen this.
Yeah, it's so exciting.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Okay, good to see you again. Maybe I'll be back next year.
That's it for today. We hope you liked this conversation as much as we did. It was produced by Rajas Nayak and sound designed by Amrit Reggie. The Morning Brief drops every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, wherever you get your podcasts. Keep listening.